right now, I just was doing a little bit of research and found that last year there were 13 and a half million prescriptions written for Ativan, lorazepam.
Sorry, how much?
Ativan,
Yeah.
13 and a half million prescriptions. The same research said that there are now 40 million adults in the United States suffering from anxiety, and that it is the largest form of mental illness, anxiety, 40 million. And they're not even able to measure the anxiety of children, which I think is also fascinating. A few things come up for me there. That there are, first of all, that anxiety is considered mental illness, I think is remarkable because it is so ever present in our lives. I don't know a single person that doesn't experience some form of anxiety every day. So if that's the case, then each of us is in the midst of a form of mental illness. Secondly, that the immediate answer to this mental illness is to treat the biochemical wisdom of the human body with drugs that somehow balance this experience of the world that has created anxiety from the pharmaceutical industry's perspective. The fact that there were 13.5 million prescriptions written and the revenue just in this drug alone, well, the benzos, just those drugs, that class of drugs alone, the revenue was almost $4 billion last year. So you can see there is this coexistence of a clear problem and the way our culture is being asked to meet that problem. And this is just in the adult world. We haven't yet approached our children. So this is a crisis. We're talking about virtually everybody we know having some element of anxiety without understanding what it arises out of. So I'm going to try and lead you on a journey that helps us to understand a bit of where this is sourced in our being. And I think a part of it is somehow dependent upon how we define ourselves. So I remember teaching my 7th grade class in my very first class in a Waldorf school, where I asked them these very deep questions. And the deepest question you can ever ask, I think, a human being is, who are you? And if someone were to ask you, who are you? What might you say? I would venture to guess you might first say, well, I am Rainbow. I am Alex. We give our name. Sometimes we may say what we do in the world to either make a living or to keep ourselves occupied. And if we were asked, and if you were to respond, well, I am a being of light and love, here to watch my destiny unfold, to meet others in an incredible community of people trying to affect change in the world, people would look at you like, that can't be who you are. Maybe that is who you are, but that's not what I was asking. Or if someone were to ask, how are you? Usually we would resort to, well, I'm fine, or I'm busy. Those are the two most common responses to how you are. So we don't spend a lot of time reflecting. I'm not saying you aren't any of those things, but I think we are a lot more than that. And perhaps the question itself is rather imperfect because it requires an answer that's static instead of perhaps who we are is really always in process, engaged in activity, meeting others. But if we look at ourselves as our name and our profession and define ourselves by are we feeling happy or sad, busy or engaged, if we look at ourselves in those ways, you can begin to see the source of all of this anxiety that seems to fill our days. So as I thought more and more about the source of anxiety, I was looking at some of the factors involved. One might be regarded, or you could look at the sources as being unmet expectations. So if we define ourselves as somebody with this name, with this profession, along with that are these expectations of how we live our life. I'm a parent, therefore I'm paying attention to my child every day, and so forth and so on. I am a teacher, I must show up at school, and there are all of these expectations that correspond with how we define ourselves. When those expectations go unmet, you can notice inside a certain feeling welling up of what we have come to know as anxiety. This feeling of I'm not really all that I can be. I'm not doing good. I'm not managing my life. I am not doing what others need of me or expect of me. You can hear this tape as it continues. All of those things are dependent upon us not being here now. All of those ways of defining who we are in this world depend on us looking at the not now, the future. And so if I were to find one element that forms the groundwork for all of this anxiety, would be not being here, being someplace else. Wherever, if that someplace else is 5 minutes away, 5 months away, 5 years away, someplace we would rather be, all of that isn't here. It's someplace else and is really a part of what is the source of anxiety. Ironically, that's not how we were born. Children are not like that. I mean, the youngest are clearly not like that. They're needing to be fed, loved, having attention on them, and all of that is right here now. Can you imagine telling an infant, imagining they would understand, but saying, I'll nurse you in 10 minutes, not right now. No, there is no 10 minutes from now. There is only right now. This is how we come into the world. We come into the world right now. We learn how to escape right now to be someplace else. And that is a necessary and yet unfortunate lesson. So yes, a part of us does need to be thinking about the future. But as Steiner said in this verse, we should not have fear about that future. We should have equanimity. We should recognize that whatever is coming towards us is exactly what we need to come towards us. So in that verse, there's also this understanding that, yes, you will have to be not in the present and in the future at some moments during your day. But if we could reduce those moments so that they do not completely conflate our day with this, literally, this lie. Because that's not where we are. We are here. The biggest part of our being is here right now. You are nowhere else. You are right here, if you allow yourself to be. So I'm going to juxtapose our own experience with the experience of children, because that's my focus, and I think you're here because it's your focus too. How can we help children not be in the space of anxiety where some of us find ourselves on a regular basis trying to manage. How can we do that? We see that naturally they're not anywhere in the future, they're right here. So how are we going to help children stay there? So I'm going to revisit this for the next bit of time, however long we're together. I'm going to keep returning to how we can help children. But we also have to help ourselves. So let's examine contemporary culture just for a moment to see if there are environmental aspects that usher us into this state of anxiety, I guess you could say, at the present. And if you look at our political figures, our leaders in government and in industry, and watch them interact with one another, watch our own reactions, watch all of the policies that are being developed, you'll see this pattern that has become mainstream and normal of taking us right out of the present into the future, filled with worry and stress and anxiety. Lots of fingers are pointing, trying to suggest that a particular perspective is ushering in a worse environment for us than another perspective. Regardless, you're going to see that this is what stands before us on a daily and nightly basis. This whole experience of how are we going to meet the problems that we face? And all we hear about are problems. Now, what's missing from that contemporary culture? Any thoughts? Well, first of all, what's missing is a celebration of what we should be grateful for, a celebration of what we are blessed with. That never makes the nightly news or the speeches of any politicians. Our leaders in industry don't want us to pay attention to that because then we will not need what they are marketing. We have developed an educational system that has taken us into adults for a couple of hundred years that wants us to be consumers, that wants us to affect the monetary exchange, the global exchange that defines who we are as human beings, not community, because there's no benefit financially or commercially to people forming community and connecting. This is what our schools were built upon. Our schools were built upon creating consumers, children that can be integrated into a culture that will recognize what they can bring, what they can do, and what they can buy. And this is something we're not going to be able to completely change that, but if we could reflect upon it, there is a happy ending to this story because there are remedies outside of Ativan that we can bring to ourselves and to children. And I'll be ending on that note because I like to end with happiness. So as I am looking at contemporary culture, I was noticing, I come from the baby boomer generation. Many of you come from the Gen X generation, the description of growing up in the late 70s and 80s that was characterized by greed is good. All of this wealth that was created through that generation is truly remarkable. I have one of my close friends who said, he was born in the late 70s, said, I was raised understanding and celebrating greed is good. This is what I live by, and it's the truth. This is what he tells me, quite proudly. This would be something even if you believed, you would never acknowledge that because it just sounds like it lacks a certain moral quality. Greed is good. He said, no, this is fantastic. This is what creates the abundance that you all appreciate. This is what he tells me. So I think about that. I don't agree with it, but I think about it. I want to know, what is it? Why should greed be good? And what is lost if that is good? Now, when you recognize that the millennial generation and the one just coming of age called Gen Z, that's what I'm told, has a completely different outlook. And one of the spokespeople in the news the most right now was just named Person of the Year by Time Magazine, Greta Thunberg from Sweden, this 16-year-old climate activist who represents, and she's right on the cusp of the I think she is Gen Z, but Gen Z and millennial, that what are you paying attention to? There is nothing more important than paying attention right now to the state of our earth that supports us. And she has such passion and resolve that infects everybody that listens to her. That's not about greed is good. Greed is good sees how the environment, the earth, serves our commercial purposes. And so we drill because we need the oil, and we use fossil fuels and all sorts of large carbon footprint that affects the climate because it's good for business and industry. And she and a whole generation of people are saying, not only is this immoral, you have to stop, and you have to stop right now. And we have to make amends. And there is no discussing it in any other form. It's very impassioned. So you see the contrast of generations right up against each other. And that fascinates me. Then I start thinking, who are the children being born now? Who are these children? What have they come to do? And how can we educate them in such a way that they can meet the destiny that they are meant to experience and bring to this planet? How can we do that? So I'm going to ask those questions over and over again. I have a few ideas, but I think they just need to be asked often. I talked with Alex. We did our first podcast a couple of days ago where we were in conversation, and Alex is a well-known, as you are here because of her, well-known birth worker in West LA, where there is so much attention and focus on how important bringing our children into the world is, in the right environment, with the right kind of consciousness, love, nutrition, environment, all of that. Couples have to be prepared. There is so much dependent upon how children are brought into the world. And what we were talking about, or what I was talking about primarily in this podcast, was we have to continue recognizing that the child continues to be born. Yes, the physical body is born at what we call birth, but there continues to be a birthing at very specific times, requiring a new kind of midwifery that allows that aspect of the child to come forward, and part of that is to meet important destiny. But because we have, what's the right word? I guess we have been conditioned to look at things in such a material way. We think there's just one birth, and the birth of the physical body, and that happens at that moment. But there are other births going on. And Rudolf Steiner spoke to those births in designing the educational program that surrounds Waldorf education. That the curriculum and the strategies we use are essential to midwife those other aspects of a child that are being born at very specific times throughout, especially the early years. So I want you to keep that thought in mind as well. And that will probably be something that we'll talk about more specifically in future events, because you can imagine if a part of a child is being born, say at age 7 or around that time, and the only thing you notice the child growing, but something very definitive, the the second teeth coming in and pushing out the baby teeth. And there's a sense of a new individuality being born. How are we going to meet that individual in a way that actually allows whatever she or he or they, as they say today, is needing to become the best that that person can be, not only the best in a measurable way, but in terms of their destiny? How are they going to meet what they're supposed to meet if they are given an antiquated curriculum, an educational approach that pays no attention to who they are? Do you see what I'm saying? It's something that we don't pay enough attention to. Almost all conventional schooling, private and public, approaches education from a very antiquated perspective. And that perspective is the transference of information. It's important that children receive information by teachers who are gifted in bringing it, and that the success is measured on how well they do in tests. That's really the formula. And it pays no attention to what is being born. In fact, it's so fascinating because the word education itself comes from the Latin educare, which means to bring forth out of. So how is it possible that we are stuck and don't even question an education that has zero respect for that perspective and only cares about what we're putting in to children, and that we don't even question it? Progressive educators don't question it. They just question the content of what we're putting in, or perhaps the strategy put in. But so few are asking, what is coming forth out of this child, and what can we bring that nourishes that child? So what I want to do for the rest of this short presentation is to look at, without being too negative, to look at what comes because of this approach, what comes into our child's experience of this world that we call anxiety, that is so prevalent, and how this is actually a symptom of them crying out for something else that we must provide them. Anybody have any questions or thoughts before I had a fifth grade, oh, I'm sorry, yes, right?
When you posed that question, it made me think what you were saying about the what else is being birthed.
Yes.
And maybe lend itself to a little bit of that, some of the other, not just the attentive mental body, but the other developmental bodies. Would that be wise to say?
Yeah, there's other elements that are far more subtle than the birth of the body that are coming forth. And you can look and reflect upon your own lives and see how you've gone through changes in your life. You can look at the old you, what you can remember. Some of your first memories, the average age of first memories are usually 4, 5, 6, 7. Some people can remember far earlier. Some can't remember before they were 9. Regardless, I haven't spoken to a single person that doesn't have memories of a different them at a different time. And so as you reflect tonight, if you think about this presentation and reflect tonight on the past you and what's different, I'm going to suggest that a new part of you actually was being birthed in those times when you recognize transformation in yourself. You might remember it in a certain grade in elementary school or junior high, associated with certain friends, certain things you did. And sometimes it could be when you were older and you were in one profession, and then all of a sudden you had this awakening that you were meant to be doing something else. At any time in your life, you could look back and see how something new was awakened within you. And it's that I'm addressing. That part of you that was awakened. These are subtle births. Because once you're awakened, you can't go back to the way you were before you were awakened to whatever you were meant to be doing. You can't. It's impossible. It's no more possible for a child to go back into the womb. The same impossibility. But we don't pay attention to these subtle bodies that are being birthed in our childhood and young adulthood. So I had a student, a parent of a student. I have a homeschooling company called Live Education that was birthed 21 years ago. And so I speak with homeschooling parents that have a Waldorf perspective on a daily basis. And this one parent recently was talking to me about her 5th grade son who was in school all the way through the first, I guess, until he was maybe 9.5 or 10. And she started paying attention to his challenges when he brought in a very powerful way. In fact, I wrote down exactly what he said because it was so powerful to me. He said, will you please homeschool me? Now, this is happening when I was growing up. I didn't know a single child that was homeschooled, nor one that had asked their parents to homeschool. Now it's happening all the time. But these are children asking parents who never considered homeschooling. And so his mother said, well, why do you want to homeschool? I hate school. What is it about school that you hate? And he said, I hate that everything is due. And I thought that was so powerful. I hate that everything is due. And so here is a 10-year-old that's able to articulate an experience that is really demonstrating this underlying anxiety. It's not that there is this joy in learning, it's that it's due. There is this, and it's not, there are aspects of the future that can be healthy, a healthy anticipation. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But this is not healthy. That if a child defines his educational experience in terms of this is due, so I must complete it, this governs every aspect of his educational experience every day. So you might remember as a young college student, or maybe even in high school, principally in college, will this be on the test? When do I have to have this paper? I mean, these were all ways that you could be the architect of your year. You would know that, okay, I have to have this final paper done by April 30th. I know it's going to take me 2 months, so I won't give myself 2 months because I won't have that. I'll start it on April 1st. I'll have to do the research, and I know I need to take these tests. Anyway, you're plotting out everything that's not now about how to organize your learning experience to be able to achieve what is expected of you. A 10-year-old doesn't have that vision of creating an educational experience. They have a direct experience that interferes with their learning and their celebration of the world. Remember, I mentioned that's never discussed in the news. What is there good out there? What can we celebrate? Because we learn at a really young age that isn't what we're being tested on, that rather this is due and this is when it's due. So it takes the child right out of the present into the future of when he or she or they must accomplish it. So her question to me was, is it legal to homeschool without having anything due? Which, to me was actually a trick question, because there are requirements if you homeschool in the state of California, but you don't have to focus on those requirements. So I was trying to help her. Well, yeah, you actually have to meet with, if you're homeschooling with an organization, you have to meet with the teacher of record once a month, bring forward 2 samples of work in each subject so that they can see that you're, but you don't have to share that with the child. So the child doesn't have to have the experience that anything is due. What you want to do with your child is to celebrate and bring forth what is so exceptional about what you're trying to bring to your child. That's what the role of the parent and the educator is, to engage the child in such a way that they recognize just how amazing the world is that they are now going to inhabit in so many more and more complex ways as they get older. And of course, there are different ways to do that in different subjects at different grades. And that's what Waldorf has been doing for 100 years so successfully. So as I was thinking about this child's experience of being engaged in school subjects, being thwarted because everything was due, I started looking at what stands behind. That's a very specific element, what's due, but what stands behind that? Well, first of all, as I've already introduced to you, it's not now, it's the future. So there's no engagement with what's now. It's rather what you're going to do with what's now in the future. So it's about the future. There's also a level of uncertainty that's part of that. Will I be able to accomplish this? I'm not saying that the child is asking that, but that stands behind it. There's uncertainty, there's the future. There's also a bit of fear. What if I don't meet that? What if I am unsuccessful? And there is this overarching sense throughout all of these considerations that lack safety. I don't feel safe in this space. All of those are at the root of anxiety. So the drug companies that have created the benzos that actually affect our consciousness do so by freeing our consciousness from this attention that we've been paying to all that aspect of the world that creates anxiety. Unfortunately, it also interferes with the attention we can pay to the nuanced, subtle, powerful aspects of our experience as well. So you'll find me, and I'm not saying that there aren't severe instances where these drugs can be helpful. I'm not a doctor, and I would never not prescribe or prescribe such medications. But it seems to me that 13.5 million out of those doses, quite a few of those are probably, there should be something else tried, certainly with our children, before we give them that. So what are the remedies? So I want to bring our attention to remedies that we could practice with our children and also in ourselves. One of the ways that Rudolf Steiner would describe aspects of our experience, and certainly in terms of schooling as well, would be dividing things into 3. So you'll hear lots of threefoldness in Waldorf education. Head, heart, and hands, body, soul, and spirit. Those kinds of organizational principles that he certainly didn't invent. It's been around for millennia. So I'm going to suggest a different threefoldness in terms of a remedy for this level of anxiety. And I'm going to suggest that one of the first remedies is nature. That by being immersed in nature, I'm going to step back. All of these aspects of anxiety take us out of ourselves. So when I was thinking about these remedies, I was thinking, what brings us back into ourselves? So if you can imagine and look upon what your experience is when you're in nature, if you are green bathing, if you are in the forest, on the beach, in the desert, you could see a little subsiding of all that you worry about if you begin to pay attention to what you're surrounded by. And something as powerful and beautiful and magnificent as nature is the perfect vehicle for getting out of your worries and the future and into the present and what surrounds you. You know that when you watch a sunset. I live right by the beach, and I try and watch the sunset as often as I can. And whenever I'm there, I watch people stopping their conversation. They do take out their phones. And they try and capture that moment so that when they look upon it, they can revisit what it's like to be completely connected in their body to nature, because it's so beautiful. I was back east last month at the height of the most amazing color, and I'm constantly showing pictures to my friends and family of the most remarkable colors, and each time I look at these photos, I'm transported right there to this amazing portrait that you wouldn't believe by being in the middle of an urban center. I literally started laughing quite loudly as we were driving down. I wasn't watching the speed, my downhill speed. Instead, I was watching all of nature in Franconia, New Hampshire through the notch, because I felt like I had just been transported into the middle of a watercolor painting. That's how powerful it was. And I couldn't think about anything other than just being there. So nature is a remedy. And that really fills your body. So I look at it as a way of connecting your body to this powerful experience. Secondly, love. When you are in the middle of a loving engagement, whether it's with a romantic partner or somebody you're caregiving or a stranger that you just connected with, or your religious orientation, or a poetic inspiration, when you are feeling this powerful experience of love right in your heart, this food for the soul, this experience of the soul, you can't be anywhere other than there, that experience. You are loving. And if you are doing that with someone else and they're not there, you're acutely aware of it. Oftentimes, if you are having this meeting with a friend where you are having a conversation that goes to the deepest parts of your soul, and there's this connection of such raw sharing that you feel united with this person in a way that you know will last forever, even if it's not lasting often. What you experience, you know, is that powerful. That feeling of love is so powerful, so joyous, so blessed. Again, it takes you out of the future that we seem to always be energized towards and into this moment with this other, where the boundaries between I and thou evaporate and you become one in conversation, in body, in soul, in deed, in vision. And it's one of those experiences that we can actually have every single day, especially young mothers with an infant, and you can't explain it because it's beyond all words. And yet it ignites something in your being that cannot be ignited in any other way. And for that, we should be forever grateful. Third, and this is an element that is a little harder to grasp. So I'm going to ask for your permission to explore the role that interest plays in our lives. It's more subtle. It's not, you can go into nature fully aware that you are going to have at least the potential to unite. You can be with a good friend, lover, infant, with the confidence that there is every reason for you to connect and that you might. But interest? Where does that come from? We know when we are surrounded and immersed in interest, we don't get tired. We don't think about what time it is. We don't think about what isn't working in the world. We are engaged, whether that interest comes because someone told you about this book and you start reading this book and you cannot put it down, or a podcast you listen to, or a video that you see, or an idea someone shares with you, or because you're studying something and your teacher or associate draws your attention someplace where you are just completely focused in a way that engages your entire being. Your entire spirit is filled with enthusiasm because this interest has arisen. Again, it's a connection, but it is the source of enthusiasm, which I might add, if you like etymology as much as I do, you'll find that the root of enthusiasm, it's the breath of God within. So somehow this quality of enthusiasm stemming from interest has a connection to the divine, and that is so powerful in our experience of who we are that it takes us out of the realm of anxiety. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's unfortunate, but it is a challenging aspect that we can't just drive to a place of interest. We can't just open up any book and find interest. However, if you notice the young child, especially 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, they tend to be able to be interested in virtually anything. If it's food, it might have to taste good. But you can cultivate that curiosity that then becomes interest, out of which enthusiasm flows with children so easily. And so they are our teachers because they can be freed from anxiety so much more easily through these methods.
I'm just going to change this diagram like that.
So this is a brief picture of the remedies that I wanted to bring forward for you to at least contemplate and recognize there are ways, and there is an educational approach that recognizes each of these, and there are applications in every sphere of life, as well as every grade and every subject, where this approach can be experienced that way. Any thoughts or questions? Yes, Hannah.
So in an educational setting, can you speak further on the love between, say, a teacher and a student, or where that emotion could bring about an ease of anxiety?
Sure. Love is a word that has so many different meanings and ways to understand. So if we were to ever suggest that a teacher who isn't the parent loves a student, we have to be, especially in today's world, very, very careful. So it's better to use other language, but it relates to what you're talking about, it relates to this connection. And Rudolf Steiner talked about this experience that we can have that is called spirit recognition. So I would like to at least just think about it in terms of recognition. If a teacher in a school, parents have this in spades with their children. They just need to remember that they recognize what lives in their child. But teachers have 25 or 30 students. Sometimes in non-Waldorf schools, they only get them for a year. In Waldorf schools, we recognize how important it is to carry on that relationship for successive years. So imagine if a teacher were trained to look into a student, into children, in such a way as to recognize what is coming alive in that child. And by being trained, I mean looking at the nuance, being able to see if a student gets something or doesn't get it, if a student is engaged or bored, if a student has access to what you're bringing or not. And if that becomes part of the teacher's regimen of working with the child, what the student experiences is, my teacher loves me. My teacher knows me. My teacher is good. So it's that kind of love that comes out of recognition that children are wanting, needing, and are nourished by. And the earlier years are the most important. So I'm a strong homeschooling advocate because there's never a doubt in my mind that the intention of the parent when engaging with their child is one of love, caring, nurturing. Where it is a question for me in classrooms, where a child becomes part of a cohort that need to do well on the standardized tests so that that teacher will be regarded as successful. It's very hard to measure if a teacher has been successful in recognizing their children. That's hard to measure. I look for it when I observe teachers, but I have a certain way of doing that. You know, I look at different aspects in my evaluation that will help me to see whether there is that connection. That needs to happen more and more, I believe, so that teachers begin to focus more and more on what's most important. Because a teacher, if you look back on your own educational experience and try and remember the subjects you studied or the teachers you had, the ones that will come forth into the forefront of your memory are the ones that you connected with. There was some aspect of that teacher, his or her enthusiasm, the way they engaged you in that subject. Sometimes it was what they looked like. They were really funny or eccentric or cute or something. Something will reverberate from that past where you will be, your memory will be jogged and you'll remember something that happened in that classroom. So that recognition is essential in this experience that the child can have. And that frees the child from anxiety as well. So if children are in an educational environment where the parent and or teachers are recognizing them, their experience of anxiety will be reduced. Part of these strategies, remedies that I'm bringing also include a way to vehicles for them to be administered in a way. And one vehicle is rhythm. That if we bring to our children a rhythm that includes aspects of these remedies, let's say every Monday you go into the forest for a hike and you draw pictures of the trees and the flowers that you see, hear stories about it, and that becomes their rhythm every Monday. They'll first of all learn about Monday, and second of all, they will feel held. There is a certain, when there's rhythm, there is a not surprise. Now, surprises can be good if they are brought in the right way at the right time. But initially with young children, surprises are not good. They could become very alarmed because it's not what has become expected. And then if they are always not knowing what's going to happen, anxiety arises. So they need to know, if you work full time, they need to have a confidence in the caregiver. It can't be somebody different all the time because that creates anxiety. You see what I'm saying? We have to bring attention to these things. So rhythm, yes.
When I'm at Hannah's house and she's got the kids and she's teaching them this and that, and we're going to go out sometime in the day, right? Only Hannah knows when she gets her stuff done. So I'm just there.
Yeah.
It's very anxiety for me, very anxious, and now I can understand the kids. Oh, we'll go when, blah, blah, blah. But never, the kids never know. They never know. Well, that time I was there. They and I wouldn't know when we're going to go, and yet when all the stuff is done and it's time to go, because as moms, we know we just have to run out in that moment. Okay, everybody, put your shoes on, we're going. And it's like, well, I wasn't ready because I didn't know when it was going to happen. I'm just saying that I don't know how to fix that because we as moms are stuck in that, especially homeschool moms, that mode of, but I do remember how it felt. Like, I don't know anything. I don't know when we're going out. I don't know where we're going. I don't know what to dress. I don't know what to do first. And it was really, really hard. So I'm glad I experienced that. And I did the same thing to my kids. But, so yes, not knowing what to expect.
So you bring up such a great point, and thank you. It's impossible to not have unexpected things happening on a daily basis. But if they are couched in a rhythmic experience for the children, so that their caregiver, their mom, their dad, whomever is there in the morning, if there's certain things that they can count on, they're going to be fed, they're going to have a bath, there's ritual, there is celebration, there's experience that they know, then in between all of that can be the unknown. But because it's surrounded by what they have come to expect, they feel safe. So the fact that you were there, but they didn't know when their mother was coming, you were there, and they feel safe in your company. They know all is right, all is good, because their grandmother is there.
No, but I was one of them.
You were right.
I tried.
the one with anxiety.
I understand.
Because if, like for instance, if Hannah said and I would say, at 1 o'clock we're going out, so I would know to do this and that, so I'm ready to go out and have my shoes ready and stuff, right? And maybe the kids needed to have at 1 o'clock, whatever we're doing, we need to get done and go out at 1. But it wasn't at 1, and I understand because I'm saying when I get all this stuff done, I'm going to run out, right? But nobody knows when we're going to get all that stuff done.
That's right.
So I'm sitting there all day not knowing, oh, should I change so we can go out? Should I not? Should I do this? Should I eat? Should I whatever? So, and I didn't say anything. So I was anxious, and I can see how kids would be anxious when we ourselves don't know exactly what these things, and if a lot of these things in life are happening, then life is just a bunch of anxiety.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to come at me and from where. So,
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, no, you bring up some great points. And this is where your role as a guardian will usher you into a new experience of the events that surround you. So your reaction, your response to the uncertainty about what was to happen next needs to lessen for the sake of the children. And when you see the children not being concerned, they don't have to know all that you're anxious about. You, as you see them accommodating everything so perfectly, you may be able to find a way yourself into feeling more calm about what's unfolding, knowing that this is exactly how it's supposed to be. And perhaps I'm supposed to be making dinner for them or taking them on a walk that was unscheduled or something at all like that. For them, it'll all be natural because you're there bringing the care and the interest that they depend upon. If you tell them about your anxiety, it is an unfortunate experience for them. You want to refrain from that. You want to protect them from what you are experiencing as an adult, and so that's why we always will tell them, don't worry. That's the most common language that we use. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Even if you aren't sure that everything's going to be fine, you have to become sure for the sake of the children. And as I read in that verse at the beginning, I don't know if you were here, but it was the verse of Steiner that said that we can't have fear about what comes out of the future. That we have to trust. And when trying to understand how we build trust, and then once we do understand elements of the building of trust, how we can then champion that process for our children, that's key. A key to happiness and safety is trust. And so how does one build trust? And so much of it is in the power of being in that present time and just looking around, what else am I supposed to be paying attention to in this moment? In this moment, what am I blessed with? What is here? What's going on? Where can I turn my attention? And do that as an example for the children, for the sake of the children. Yes.
So, when I was thinking about this in your response, the things that kind of came to me were, I understand, like, as adults, we think about time in a certain kind of schedule or manner or things like that, of like how a day goes. But I'm thinking, I know myself and I know my wife, and we operate differently in that aspect as well. But I'm wondering, as children develop, is there a certain point where this time of 1 p.m. they're not recognized at all, and maybe the finishing activity is actually, that's the schedule, and maybe is there a certain point where the timing of like the clock seeps into that? And
Absolutely.
Are we supposed to try to not let that seep in, or?
Yes. What a great question. Thank you. Yeah, there is a time when we want to teach children about time, because there's another part of them being born that they can handle it. But if we don't pay attention to the evolving child, we think at any age we could tell them such things, and we make that mistake. We tell 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. I remember I was in England and visiting a family. There were lots of homeschooling collectives that I met when I traveled through England, and I remember this instance. It was a 3-year-old, I think, Yeah, he was about three or four. And he wanted a cookie. And I was talking with the parents. I'll never forget this. He wanted a cookie. It was a chocolate chip cookie, I think. And the parents said, you had a cookie an hour ago. And that was like a foreign language to this 3 or 4 year old. What do you mean? What are you talking about? That has no meaning. But to the parent, it had every bit of it. Yeah, you had one an hour ago. Why would you need one now? You can't have one now. You would just have one. And then when he continued to cry, he said, you can have one after dinner. What's after dinner? That's not now. That's in another world, another land. A 3 or 4 year old, why would you ever think that adult consciousness should be so impressed upon a 3 or 4 year old at such an inopportune time? What gives us such arrogance? I'll tell you what it does. What does? The fact that we're not paying attention to who that child is. If we were to pay attention, we would see they have no access to those concepts. And if we, in humility, recognize that, we can begin to work with the child. If we approach the child with arrogance, we would think we must make that child learn that. This is what it means in an hour, and we'll set a timer. It's now an hour, here's your cookie, or something like that. And it's so unfortunate that we don't have the eyes to behold the beauteous unfolding of each and every child. That's what they ask of us. So, I'm not saying that you should give the child the chocolate chip cookie. I'm just saying you don't bring time in at that moment. But there's a wonderful moment where you can. And as the child learns to tell time, and you can begin that when the child starts asking questions, but it's wonderful to do it on an analog clock where you actually see the advance of it, not just a digital experience, but you see the big hand and the little hand going around the circle. In a Waldorf program, it's right around a child being 8 or 9 in that time where something new is arising and their interest in the world is becoming so profound that you could actually point to the source of time, which of course is the sun. And when you're making a sundial and you're able to see how the shadow casts, the light of the sun casts the shadow on the sundial, and it forms an actual experience for the child of the clock. You can actually show the consistency of the sundial with the clock. There is this access that they have. There's this engagement. It's very practical. And there is the opportunity for the most magical aspect of a child in education, and that is the aha experience of when they get, I see it. And that's the source of enthusiasm and engagement with the world, this aha experience. And that's one of the reasons why I'm such a strong advocate for parents homeschooling. Even if you aren't homeschooling full-time, all of your interaction with children, when you are with them, is homeschooling. You are an educator for them. And when in my first grade in Boulder, I helped start the Waldorf School in Boulder, Shiny Mountain Waldorf School, and I had the first grade. And I will never forget, at the end of each day, bringing the children out to the parents waiting for their little ones. So this is the first year of the school, and 70% of our parent body were Buddhists, and they were very focused, and they had this experience of their children being very special. And all children are special, but these parents were very conscious of it, and they wanted to know, how school was, what happened. And I started telling them stories about what we did in school. And the look on the faces of these moms and dads were ones of envy, I guess you could say, or you are having this wonderful time with my children, watching something unfold in them that's being denied me as the parent. What the parent gets to do, take the child home, give them a snack, maybe a nap, basically feed, clothe, maintenance, hygiene, and then give them back to me to have all of these wonderful experiences.
Seriously.
And the aha experiences of 5, 6, and 7-year-olds are profound. Well, they're profound at every stage of development. If you are fortunate enough to watch your child take their first step right around, somewhere between 10 months and 14 months is the average. If you watch them, not just the success of taking their first step, but the look on their face when they've accomplished it, you get to see one of the most powerfully magical experiences that they will have in their lives. They may not remember it, but you get to see that experience going into their body. There's pure joy at defying gravity, as no other animal can do. And they do that consistently in that framework when things are unfolding in a rhythmic way in their lives. That's an aha experience in their body. No greater or no less the experience that children will have if they're in a Waldorf school or if they're being homeschooled by a Waldorf parent, when you're doing a watercolor painting and being able to watch them have the experience of the intermixture of colors where two primary colors become a secondary color. And that is as remarkable an experience. I've spoken about this in other talks that I've given, but in that particular first grade class, I remember telling the parents about this painting I had done that day, where I painted the bright yellow sun in one corner and the Prussian blue dark earth, and watching the warmth of the sun reach down into the earth and painting, the children were all watching, painting that ray of sun coming straight from the sun into the earth without picking my brush up, right into the dark earth, and then lifting the brush slightly. And children, do you know what happened then? And then up onto the white page was this green shoot, and there was this hush, it's green. And that experience of a story of the warmth of the sun into the deep coldness of the earth, and that love that went in from the sun into the earth arises in a green plant that later they would learn nutritionally we eat and take in that light of the sun, is very, very powerful. And the appreciation and the gratitude, not only for the sun, but they will never, ever forget that yellow and blue make green. But they didn't learn it as a fact. They had this experience through story, and telling that and watching this great appreciation of that and telling that to the parents. That's where they look, I want that with my child too. Yes.
That's the wonderful thing about the Steiner and the Waldorf, is as you're doing that painting with the children, you are not saying, oh, now you see this yellow color? Now watch. It's going down here, you see? It's mixing up. I am quite sure in all my experience with Culver, you did it, and they saw it. And afterwards you talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember all those things, trigonometry and everything. The first year they just went out and saw the tree. How can we see how tall that tree is? And nobody explained formulas or anything first. They took the kids out and they experienced it. And that's something we can all do. We don't have to be homeschoolers. We don't have to be in the Waldorf school or anything, just that idea of, you don't have to explain everything as you do it, just let them experience it and then talk about it.
And the connection that the children have to the subject. Now you can see there's no anxiety. I wonder if this yellow meeting this blue will turn into that green. That doesn't come up because they're immersed in story and they are enabled to have this aha experience. And sometimes they become more and more subtle, but no less powerful. Yes?
Do you think that experience helps children avoid or deal better with anxiety, especially
Absolutely.
if they're prone to, like, I remember in school, like, I would see all these formulas in math, and it would just give me so much anxiety.
That's right.
Or like the vowels changing for Spanish class, and I would just get so much anxiety about it.
Yeah.
But like, is this form of learning a way to like introduce them to it and give them an understanding, and that's how the anxiety with learning.
Of course,
goes down?
because the provider of the education isn't focusing on the transference of information. We're telling stories. We're building bridges to the world. And we're doing so using powerful archetypes that children have access to at very specific times in their lives that result in an aha experience. And whenever we have them in more subtle ways as adults all the time, sometimes it'll be with a friend. And you're talking to a friend, and all of a sudden you have this insight. I love the word insight. It's like seeing in, this insight into why they are a certain way because they just they trusted you and told something of their biography to you. And boom, you just figured out why they behave in a particular way with you at specific times. And that's another aha experience at a very subtle level. So those are available to us pretty much every moment of every day if we open ourselves up to it. In the opening is where anxiety is released. So there is an opening in us, and it's our birthright as human beings, that allow for these bridges to be built and connections to be made, where insight occurs that creates this faith and trust and safety in the world, and anxiety evaporates. It's difficult to have that every moment of every day, but if we have enough moments in our days of that, our faith will be regained. We'll feel at one again with this beautiful world that we inhabit. And that, as a model for our children, will be very, very powerful. I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much for your attention and coming here and even having this curiosity to see what is there about education that can afford us a different experience of our lives and our children. So perhaps we'll have more. We'll see. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you. And if anybody is interested in coming to see Rainbow speak again, I'd like to take down your names. I'm not so great with tech, but I see lots of paper and pen here, and we can keep it all in one place. The idea is to do this every month so that we can kind of drop back in and ilk some of this.
I would like to build on this particular subject because I've just scratched the surface of all that I wanted to bring. Just beginning this, there are, but it was a good introduction, I think. So.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
So I met Rainbow. We kind of reviewed our story of connection. I won't go into it tonight, but once my daughter was born, we'd known each other for several years, and I watched how my infant reached for him. And it was so interesting to watch this person who, like, she just had this fondness, and he had this connection with her. And I asked him to be my daughter's godfather, because I wanted this kind of mentorship in helping me choose an educational experience for my daughter that would continue to trust her instincts of aliveness. So we've been in Waldorf. We started in kinder and we're in 5th grade now. And what I hear you say about building bridges, what I hear is our experience has been more about relationship, right? So just as an example, when learning numbers, it became about a story about 0. And they go over this in 1st grade, like they start from the beginning. And then it became a story about 1. And then maybe there was a story about 2. And that's where the conversation was tabled. And you think, well, we all know how to count to 20 by the time we're in kindergarten. Like there are certain fundamentals that are drilled in so our children are not left behind. After 0, 1, and 2, the teacher then had a conversation with the kids and said, which is best? And then the children had a philosophical dialogue for an hour about why 0 was best, or why 1, or why 2. And that's the point. So you had a question about trigonometry and the stress of these like big mathematical, I don't even know if I took trig, I have to be honest. I don't think I even got that far because it was overwhelming for my brain. However, when you start with a fundamental of relationship, when you start with a foundation of relatability, learning how to spell from a kinesthetic experience, learning how to count and learning how to do math from a story perspective, it's not alienating, it's very approachable. And I wonder, like the parents in your first grade, had we all had an experience of learning numbers from what is our relationship to them, or learning words from putting shaving cream on our desk and writing in the shaving cream, or getting beeswax and learning how to spell words with beeswax, or being in a circle where you're spelling the word bat on somebody's back or somebody's spelling it on yours at the same time. If we'd had this approach to learning, how different these concepts that are daunting or overwhelming would have been for those of us who didn't have that kind of linear capacity that was inherent.
Has there been studies done? Like, is there stress level a lot lower than the typical?
You know, stress levels are hard to measure.
Yeah. But do
No,
you feel
so-
like the kids are less anxiety ridden at those schools compared to the standard?
That's a long, it's a long story.
Yeah.
Because I'm also, since I work primarily in public Waldorf, I see unfortunate aspects that come into classrooms in all schools, including Waldorf schools, that create anxiety. That I'm trying to awaken. The teachers that are most interested are the teachers in Waldorf programs that are, and because it's more subtle. The things that create anxiety are more subtle. It's so obvious in more conventional. So, you know, you're going to have to take a test every Friday at this time, and you have to read. There are all of these requirements. Everything is due. I hate that everything is due, just like that boy said. And so that's obvious. I'm deeply concerned about what's less obvious in the schools that I work with, and also with families that I work with, in trying to just bring our attention. And we can do this, and our children demand it. The children being born today are far more sensitive, in my opinion.
On every level, right? Like
Yeah.
we see that with kids who are on all different kinds of spectrum. You know, you went from 1 in 10,000 20 years ago to 1 in 40. You know, and there's so many reasons for that, right? The level of input, the stimulus, the screen time, the food, the chemicals. Like there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm going to pass this around. If you would like to continue to participate in these conversations, please put your email down.
And I'll hang out for a little while if people want to talk more.
See, just back on, I guess, continuing on that subject, like I went to an alternative high school I went, and unfortunately they recently just closed in upstate New York, but their approach, very different from Waldorf, wasn't necessarily like, you know, let's explain it to you. It was more like, I don't like math, it's really hard, I don't get it, I probably won't need it anyway because of what I want to do when I grow up. And they were like, okay, well, what do you want to do? Like, what do you like? Oh, you like that? Okay, then you should like that. Or, you know, I don't really want to write this paper, it doesn't really, you know, it's not really interesting to me, but what do you want to write a paper on? Okay, go ahead. But I wonder if, like, the more gentle approach to subjects from the beginning would set up for success a little more. Like, take away the fear instead of just building on interest. That's what's really interesting about the Culver education.
There is, so the unschooling movement suggests that we should only teach to children that which they're interested in. My main objection to that is that how do children know what they're interested in if they haven't yet been exposed to it? So it's, I would not, you know, it's one thing in high school, so you didn't say what grade the school, but when you're talking about—
K through 12, but I started in 9th grade.
Yeah, so 9th grade. I mean, that's a different, I mean, we'd be talking about something completely different. I'm talking about first educational impulse and practice. So preschool, kindergarten, first grade. Any more than would you say, here, eat whatever you want to eat. You know, no parent would do that with a child, because what if the child only wanted to eat chocolate chip cookies? You say, oh, I didn't mean that. Chocolate chip cookies and ice cream. I mean, here, eat, here's your choice of vegetable. But that's not what you said. You said, eat what I want to eat. What if I don't want to eat that? And we want to be able to present that which is going to nourish our children. And in my view, children will find a way to enter into all subjects if presented in the right way at the right time. Is that?
Yeah, that's, I think that's important.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks again. I'm going to say goodbye.
Thank you.
And,
That was very
yeah.
helpful.
Good. Yeah, and I'll be around again if you want to talk one-on-one. I'll just hang out for a while. It's always a good thing when people want things to continue, and it's a good thing. It means that there was a chord struck, which I'm glad. I encourage you to speak with your friends and family about education, because it's not being attended to enough.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
That
thank
was
you.
really good. Nice to meet you.